Welcome to Terms of Service. I'm CNN tech reporter Claire Duffy. Rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft are advertised as a safe choice for a ride home. And they have often provided a safer alternative to, say, driving home after an evening out drinking. But rideshare apps are facing thousands of lawsuits from users who allege they were assaulted by their drivers over the past few years. To understand what's happening, I spoke with Rachel Abrams, a partner at the law firm Pfeiffer Wolf. She represents many of the people who have filed these lawsuits, including the plaintiff in the first federal bellwether trial against Uber. That woman, Jaylyn Dean, was awarded $8.5 million in February after an Arizona jury found Uber liable in her rape. Rachel's been working on these types of cases for years. She and I first met in 2024 when I interviewed one of her clients, a Florida woman who alleged she'd been raped by her Lyft driver. We are going to talk about what you need to know about these cases and about staying safe when using rideshare apps.
Uber controls every aspect of a ride. They set the prices and the fares, and they match the rider with the passenger, and they market themselves. Go have another drink, ride with us, safe ride home. You're safe with Uber.
Also, when I reached out to Uber for comment on this episode, they offered the opportunity to speak with Kim Bueno, the lawyer who represents the company in Dean's case. Kim, a litigation partner at Kirkland & Ellis LLP, will explain why Uber is appealing the decision and the measures the company has taken to protect users.
Uber maintains its commitment to safety and is always looking at ways to make the platform safer.
A warning to listeners that this episode includes details of sexual assault. Those conversations, first with Rachel, then with Kim, after this short break. So, Rachel, you have been working on these rideshare sexual assault cases for years. How did this issue first come to your attention?
I live in San Francisco, born and raised, and Uber was started here in San Francisco. And I started hearing of reports in the news about women, particularly, that had been sexually assaulted. And so my law firm decided that we would look into this. And I actually remember the first call I got. It was on Super Bowl Sunday, 2019, and I'm a huge football fan. And that was my first Lyft client that had been raped by her Lyft driver just a week before. And she was my first client. And
wow.
I've devoted my career to the rideshare sexual assault epidemic since then.
So you just wrapped up, as I said, this first federal bellwether trial, although Uber has said it will appeal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But can we just start with the emotions of trials like this? How are you feeling after this result? And how does bringing these cases affect plaintiffs?
Well, I feel so proud of my client, Jaylyn Dean, who was the first bellwether case that just went to trial in Phoenix. But of course, we have thousands of other clients, as well as other survivors that have yet to come forward or that will be assaulted by their Uber or Lyft drivers in the future, that until there's safety changes on these platforms, we're going to continue to have these problems.
I want to talk a little bit about Jaylyn's case that was just decided in Arizona, and then we'll get into some of the other cases and how they're all connected. But what were the allegations in Jaylyn's case?
Jaylyn Dean was 19 years old, and she was attending flight attendant school in Phoenix, Arizona. She was celebrating after graduating from the 6-week program and had some drinks with her friends and ended up, needing an Uber ride back to her hotel. She was going to graduate the next day. And unfortunately, within 4 minutes of getting in the Uber ride, the Uber driver turned off the application, veered off to a dark, secluded area and raped her. And then took her back to her hotel right after that.
Wow.
So there were numerous causes of action involved in the case, but at the end of the day, the jury found Uber liable for that rape and for their actions that night.
Were there any highlights from the trial or information that came out that you found especially striking and that people should be aware of?
Well, there's a lot of information, and it's all publicly available now because after the trial, all of the internal Uber documents that are, highly confidential or confidential are now made public. The most probably shocking thing is that Uber has an algorithm that assesses the risk of sexual assault on its platform. It's called SRAD. So every ride received an SRAD safety risk assessment score.
Wow.
And Uber decides to set the threshold on different cities and different nights, depending on how many drivers they have. So if there's not a lot of drivers on the road, they may lower that threshold to allow higher risk rides to be matched. That's something that, I mean, as an Uber passenger would want to know. You're getting into a high risk ride.
Uber's AI-powered risk assessment program, known as SRAD or Safety Ride Assessed Dispatch, rates rides on a scale from 0 to 1, with 1 being the highest risk. The system is based on factors such as time of day, whether the pickup is in the vicinity of a bar, and a rider's and driver's history on the app. Uber gave the ride Jalen Dean took an SRAD score of 0.81 out of 1. But Uber never informed Jalen of its risk assessment, as the platform does not share that information with riders. The jury decided that Uber was liable in this case because the driver was acting as what's called an apparent agent of the company during the incident, but didn't find Uber liable for negligence or design defects. And as you said, in that case, awarded the plaintiff $8.5 million in damages. What did you make of that decision?
I thought it was a great decision in that, Uber controls every aspect of a ride. They set the prices and the fares, and they match the rider with the passenger, and they market themselves, including to people like Jalen Dean. Go have another drink, ride with us, safe ride home. You're safe with Uber. So that marketing instills a sense of trust and belief particularly to women, to make them feel safe, that they can get a safe ride home, especially after having a few drinks at night. So that's what the jury saw and they took away was Uber, even though they're independent contractors, and not employees of Uber. That doesn't matter because they've made everyone believe that they're agents, that they have a relationship with Uber that's more than just an independent contractor. And that's where the apparent agency comes in. The jury said, hey, we believe that this Uber driver committed this rape, and we believe that Jalen had every reason to believe that the driver was an agent of Uber that night, and Uber is therefore responsible and liable for that rape.
Jalen's was just the first case to go to trial of more than 3,000 similar lawsuits that have been filed against Uber. Those cases, filed by plaintiffs all over the country, have been consolidated into what's known as a single federal multi-district litigation, or MDL. One judge will oversee the litigation and deal with issues of evidence and testimony that are relevant to all the cases for the sake of efficiency. But unlike in a class action, each case must be resolved separately.
It's not practical to try thousands of cases. So the bellwethers are supposed to help guide how juries value different types of cases, which is why in our bellwether pool, we have 20 cases in the bellwether pool currently, have various injuries, different locations, different states, so that we can get a sense of how juries will value different types of cases. And hopefully that will result in a settlement of the cases.
Got it. So you try those 20 cases with different fact patterns, different plaintiffs and different juries, and then that helps decide how to settle the other thousands of cases.
Yeah. Hopefully we don't have to try all 20. Sometimes it settles before any of them. Sometimes they settle after one, sometimes two. It kind of depends on various factors, but that's what's great about Jalen Dean's case is that it really was a true bellwether, and it gave us how a jury would see that type of case and that type of injury.
A California jury found in September, in the first of the state cases to go to trial, that Uber was not liable in connection with the sexual assault of another passenger. How does that factor in terms of impact on future cases? Is that considered sort of separately because it was a state case and not one of these federal cases?
Well, yes. Every trial and every case we had information to take to the next, but that was a very different case, very different judge, different jurisdiction or forum. And, in that case, the jury did find that Uber was negligent, They just didn't see that negligence as causing injuries in that specific case in that plaintiff. But we take all information in from all the trials to build on for the next trial, including the bellwether trials and the MDL that are coming.
There are also cases you mentioned against Lyft, and presumably this has also been an issue with taxi cabs too. Like, talk a little bit about the big picture issue here and how widespread this is.
Oh, yes. There's a huge problem with Lyft as well. And until the safety measures to prevent sexual assaults are implemented by them, then they'll continue to happen. But taxi cabs, there isn't a lot of information and data about taxi cabs because taxi drivers have to undergo rigorous training, including sexual assault training and a lot of things like that. And there's also safety measures in vehicles. I haven't been in a taxi cab in the last 20 years where there wasn't plexiglass and even pre-COVID and cameras.
Yeah, you're so separated from the driver in a way that is different from being in an Uber or a Lyft.
Yeah, and even before the whole rideshare industry, when I was taking taxis, there were cameras in most of the vehicles. So that's something that really sets it apart.
When I reached out to Lyft for comment on this episode, they told me, quote, "Everyone deserves to feel safe and respected on the Lyft platform, and any act of violence has no place in the Lyft community or our society." They said that from January 2020 to December 2022, over 99.9% of rides were completed without safety or other issues, but added, quote, "We recognize that even one incident is one too many. We are continually investing in tools and policies to help prevent and detect potential unsafe situations." In these cases, are the implicated rideshare drivers involved, and do they face consequences, the people who actually perpetrated these assaults?
It depends, but not usually because, first of all, most of these are not reported, even though we're talking about a lot of numbers of survivors. Most women don't come forward. And so those that do, and the vast majority of the cases that are even on file, do not go to the police because they feel they won't be believed. A lot of them were intoxicated. They have to go through a very hard process of victim blaming. So a lot of them do not report to the police, and that would be a requirement for them to charge. So there aren't a lot of consequences unless a survivor decides to report.
The jury found Uber liable for Jalen Dean's rape because the driver was acting as an apparent agent of the company, but didn't find the company liable for negligence or design defects, something Uber has claimed as a win. Uber said in a statement that the verdict, quote, "affirms that Uber acted responsibly and has invested meaningfully in rider safety." As we'll hear from Uber's legal representation, Kim Bueno, later on, the company plans to appeal the verdict. More on their response and how you can stay safe while using rideshare apps after the break. The issue of rideshare assaults isn't new. Back in 2018, CNN published an investigation about U.S. Uber drivers accused of sexually assaulting or abusing passengers in the previous 4 years. Later, Uber released its own reports on the thousands of sexual assault reports it received, although it maintains that these incidents are very rare. Rachel said that part of the reason it took years for these cases to get to court is because until 2018, Uber and Lyft forced drivers and riders with sexual assault or harassment claims into private arbitration. Having seen so many of these cases, are there commonalities among them in terms of circumstances or where things often perpetrators take advantage of the situation?
These perpetrators know that they have a vulnerable, usually a vulnerable woman in the back, had too much to drink, late at night, trying to get a safe ride, and these are crimes of opportunities. They also know a lot of these women are not going to tell anyone. So there's many commonalities with regards to that.
Do you think that Uber has the responsibility to warn customers to let them know about these common risk factors?
Yes, for sure. I mean, like I was saying about the SRAD score. I mean, if you had something pop up on your phone when you're ordering an Uber that just says, "Hey, by the way, this ride has been flagged as a high chance of a sexual assault," then you can make that decision, an informed decision on taking that ride or maybe taking a different ride. I think everybody at least have to know that information to make that informed decision.
I want to talk about Uber's response here. The company has repeatedly denied that it is responsible for assaults by drivers. In that Arizona case, a spokesperson told me at the time of the decision that the jury, quote, rejected claims that Uber was negligent and that our safety systems were defective. They noted that the plaintiff didn't receive the full damages she asked for and said the verdict, quote, affirms that Uber acted responsibly and invested meaningfully in rider safety. And of course, the company has rolled out a number of safety features. But before we get into those, what do you make of that response?
$8.5 million is a huge verdict, and one we're really proud of. And to then now tout that as a victory for Uber is just mind-blowing to me. Clearly, we're thrilled with the fact that the jury found Uber liable for the rape of Jaylen Dean, with, whatever causes of action the jury found for or not, that at the end of the day, it was a plaintiff's victory in the tune of $8.5 million.
It's worth noting that while $8.5 million may be a relatively small price to pay for a company as big as Uber, if the thousands of other cases are resolved in a similar way, Uber could potentially be on the hook for billions of dollars in damages. The company has put out safety reports for 2017, 18, 2019, 20, 2021, 22. They have not released one since then, but in the most recent report, they said that over 1.8 billion U.S. trips that occurred in those 2 years, from January 2021 to December 2022. Uber says there were just shy of 3,000 of what it calls the most serious categories of sexual assault and misconduct, and that 99.9% of rides ended without any kind of safety report. Do you see those as accurate numbers? And obviously, even if it's just a 0.1 instance, those are still people that are getting hurt.
Yeah, if you look at all of their rides, they you could say 0.001%. How about we talk about women late at night, while drinking, or within all the things that they know are high risk? Let's narrow it to what we're talking about. That percentage goes way up. So it's really how you skew the data. In addition, as you noted, they said these are their top 5. There's 21 categories in their taxonomy of sexual assault and harassment, right? So they report on only the top 5. Wouldn't you want to know about the rest of them as a consumer that's reading the safety report and relying on that information? So, that's the information that the passengers and the public should hear, right? And then make their own decisions about what information is relevant for them to make those decisions to ride with Uber.
So Uber does now offer a range of safety features. You can choose to record audio during a ride. Drivers can record a ride with their smartphone cameras. You can share your live trip information with a friend. And Uber says it has a 24/7 support team that can respond to safety incidents. What are the gaps that you see here? What more needs to be done to be addressing this issue?
They do have safety features. A lot of those safety features do not go to prevention. You already are in the vehicle feeling that something's going to happen, or something has already happened. One of those is the ride check. If, in Jaylen Dean's case, the driver immediately turned off the ride, canceling it, and deviated from the route. That triggers a ride check by Uber saying, is everything okay? You've deviated, or it's the canceled. But as she testified, she didn't see that until she was reporting to the police, because she was being raped when that ride check came in. So, And they also don't follow up on the ride checks. They may call, and if no one answers, that's it, right? So the effectiveness of a lot of these safety features isn't there.
I'm just curious what more you think should be done here. Are there features that you think would be more effective? Yes. You mentioned cameras.
Cameras is the biggest one, in my opinion. In this day and age, you can't walk outside without being on a camera, a Ring camera, your ATM, whatever. There's cameras everywhere. And those cameras are a huge deterrent. And if something does happen, then you have it. And it protects both the drivers and the passengers.
At least in New York, Uber drivers generally have cameras. Is it just something that they don't mandate across their entire network?
Yes. Right now, there is, voluntary cameras. So some drivers will have them and you'll get the notification, but it's not mandatory. So what would be the deterrent? And even the driver in Jaylen Dean's case testified, if there was a camera, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very, very telling, right? So what we're saying is mandatory. The driver can't turn them off. It keeps running, and if you stop the ride or deviate or cancel, as long as the passenger and the driver are within the same distance, it keeps going. And it's maintained by a third party, not by Uber, and accessed. So it's a cloud-based thing. And these are all feasible options that are not, certainly for a multi-billion-dollar company, not that expensive. And as I said, cameras are pretty routine in taxi cabs right now.
Uber at the start of March also made this feature called Women Preferences available nationwide in the US. And this, at least in theory, allows women riders to request or schedule a ride with women drivers. The challenge in my mind is like, again, I live in New York City. I've been here almost 8 years. I think I've maybe had a female Uber driver twice. Like, I just don't know how long I would be waiting if I wanted to use this feature. What do you make of that offering? Is it a step in the right direction?
Yes, I definitely think it is a step in the right direction. And again, I think it's been a problem to maintain women drivers on the platform because of the risk of sexual assault and them driving at night and being vulnerable in that regard. So the drivers can actually choose women preference options. And so I believe this is good for the women that want to be drivers for Uber. I do know people that have used the woman matching option as passengers and said it wasn't that long. And of course, the risk of being sexually assaulted versus waiting an extra 5 to 10 minutes, I think you would choose option B.
I want to leave listeners not just feeling freaked out by this, but with some practical advice here. Obviously, in many cases, it's not realistic for people just to stop using these platforms altogether because they do provide a lot of convenience. In light of that, what can folks, especially women, do to stay safer using these platforms?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's a reality. Everyone needs to take a ride share and they're not going anywhere, right? They're very convenient, but if Uber and Lyft aren't going to protect you as a passenger, you got to protect yourself. Be on the phone with a friend, obviously let people know that you're taking one. Try to avoid riding alone. Try to avoid taking or using one late at night after you've had some drinks with your friends. You can take action to protect yourself.
What should someone do if they or someone they know has been assaulted by a rideshare driver?
Report. It's so underreported. It just perpetuates the problem with like, oh, it's so rare, it doesn't happen. When we already know sexual assault survivors don't come forward a lot of the time. So we'll hopefully through this litigation and, plaintiffs like Jalen Dean, who empower other survivors to come forward and report. We don't even know the extent of the problem, which is already pretty vast because a lot of people don't report. So reporting is key.
Uber says it takes a number of steps to protect passengers and drivers. I spoke with Kim Bueno, the lawyer who represented Uber in the Arizona case, and asked her about some of those safety changes that Rachel suggested, like required camera recording. So just to sort of start big picture here, Uber is facing more than 3,000 federal lawsuits from plaintiffs, many of them women who allege that they were raped or assaulted or harassed by their drivers. Obviously, these are cases that need to be tried in court, but the scale of this, if you're looking from the outside, I think would seem to suggest that there is a problem here. What is Uber's response to these cases?
Well, there is a problem in the sense that sexual assault is a really serious problem in our society, and that is reflected on the Uber platform as it is in all areas of society, which is why Uber has taken so many steps and done so much to try to make the platform as safe as possible. But when it comes to the MDL itself, I think that it's important when we're looking at those numbers to understand that some of those claims are different than others. There's a very wide range of claims from someone saying that they were raped and survivors coming forward with serious stories of sexual assault, everything down to somebody made a comment that I didn't like or alleged touch that may or may not have occurred. So we are dealing with a very broad spectrum of cases within that docket.
But when it comes to the cases, you mentioned a number of those are serious sexual assault allegations. I know we've seen the headlines of some of those. What is Uber's position? Obviously, these lawsuits are alleging that Uber bears some responsibility there. What is Uber's position?
Well, we just had a trial in Phoenix. I know you're familiar with that, when all of those allegations were brought to a jury. Allegations of negligence, that we didn't do enough, that our safety features were defective, and the jury rejected all of that after a 3-week trial, and Uber was exonerated when it came to any liability of what the company did. I know you're aware there was a finding against Uber on an agency claim that we are appealing. But when it really comes to allegations of did we do enough, was Uber reasonable in its approach to safety, the jury said, yeah, you are, and decided in our favor. And we were pleased with that after showing all of the documents and interview evidence to the jury.
Yeah, so let's talk about that case. The jury in this case found that Uber was liable in this plaintiff's rape because the driver was acting as, quote, an apparent agent of the company. Uber is appealing that piece of the decision. You mentioned the jury found in Uber's favor in a number of the other claims, but tell me about why Uber is appealing that apparent agent finding.
It is Uber's belief that it was kind of a square peg, round hole situation where the court was applying employment law to a rideshare industry where employment law doesn't apply because drivers are not employees of Uber. They are third-party independent contractors. So that's the rub. So not only do we believe the court got it wrong in instructing the jury and giving them an opportunity to consider this apparent agency claim, but then within those instructions, we took issue with the way they were instructed on the scope. In other words, in employment context, the question that a jury decides is, was this bad act done within the scope of the employment? And our position, and what we think is correct under Arizona law, is that the scope question should have been, was this alleged sexual interaction within the scope of what this driver was supposed to be doing? And I think we can all agree that absolutely not. That this driver was going to take the passenger from point A to point B, and sexual intercourse was not part of that proposition.
Yeah, I mean, I want to just dig into this a little bit more because I think for people who are listening who may not sort of understand the legal technicalities here, it sounds confusing that an Uber driver wouldn't be considered an agent of Uber. We all, I think, understand this idea that the drivers are not employees. The company has talked a lot about that. But the only reason a rider ends up with that driver is because they found them on Uber. And I think we also, you show up at the airport, there are the random guys who say, hey, do you want to ride? And you say no, because I feel safer taking an Uber because the brand is associated with safety. We know that at least to some level, these drivers have been vetted. So I just think maybe people would be confused by this idea that the driver is not an agent.
I think it comes down to a distinction from a legal perspective between what an agent is and what we use in our everyday lay language. There are parameters on what it means to be an employee, what it means to be an independent contractor, what it means to be an agent. And the terms of service for Uber have always included very specific language that drivers are not agents, they're not apparent agents, they're not employees. They don't have to report in and say when they're going to drive. They don't have to drive a specific car. They can, as independent contractors, make their own schedule. And that is something that everyone must agree to before using the app.
And from a rider perspective, should you just understand that when you've agreed to the terms of service, which say drivers are independent contractors, they're not employees, they're not agents, that then you are sort of taking on whatever risks might be, inherent in getting in that random person's car?
Well, I think that the law allows claims to be brought for negligence, but what the jury in Phoenix was asked to decide is whether or not Uber acted with reasonable care to prevent a foreseeable risk. And in the case of the Phoenix trial, the jury heard that the driver in question had not just passed the initial background check, but 12 background checks over the course of his time driving on the Uber platform. So The question of foreseeability is, did Uber have reason to believe that a driver would be problematic or would commit a crime? And in the case in Phoenix, the jury heard that this driver had a very high star rating, lots of great feedback, had been a rideshare driver for 6.5 years without problems, passed all the background checks. And when the question was, did Uber do anything wrong? I think they found, and they did find, that we acted with reasonable care to prevent any foreseeable risk. And that's what it comes down to.
One of the things that came up at trial was Uber's safety risk assessment score, or SRAD score. When I spoke with Rachel Abrams, she sort of noted that this incorporates factors like the day and time of the ride. Is the ride picking up near a bar? And I think the question that I had, certainly listening to that description, the fact that Uber makes this calculation, this estimate, is why doesn't Uber share that score or other information about those common risk factors that it knows exists with riders before they get in the car?
One of the allegations in the trial was that Uber was negligent for having this program and not telling riders about it. And in fact, this plaintiff said if she had known, she never would have taken an Uber. And the jury rejected that. And they said, no, that's not right. I think once everyone hears the evidence and what this program is about, they realize that Uber is, as a technology company, using this data that they've gathered for good. And so what it is doing is using data across literally millions of rides to figure out on an aggregate level how to decrease risk. And I think there is sometimes a misconception that somehow it's a score to show whether or not the driver is safe. And that could not be further from the truth. It's really looking at categories to build the best match possible.
I guess I'm still left with the question, why not share that information? And perhaps even with riders and drivers, because I hear what you're saying, that certainly it makes sense that this is intended to decrease risk and put people in safe matches. And I wonder, as a rider, would you still want to ultimately be able to make that decision for yourself, or to get in the car and call your partner on the way home so that you have a little backup or something like that? I'm sort of curious about the decision making around not sharing that information with riders and drivers.
I think that it comes down to being able to provide information that would be actionable for someone. And that's not what this does. There is no number, so to speak, that could be provided that would give an average, rider or driver any insight into what it means. The numbers that are coming from this machine learning algorithm are very complicated. They're ever changing, and it's not in a position to provide data that a user like us could look at and have any context for, because of the way that the program works with different thresholds set for different times of day. It is one of many features that Uber has available. There's a Share My Ride feature that we encourage everyone to use. So SRAD is just one of like a portfolio of multi-layered products. And once I think you see where it fits in, you realize there is a lot of information that's given to riders.
Will you walk through some of those other safety features?
Oh, absolutely. So the jury heard that as of November 2023, which was the incident time that was at issue in Phoenix, there was a huge number of features. And I can tell you that even now, there's even more. So at that time, there was in-app audio recording, where either a driver or a rider can get in and turn it on to record that trip. There's definitely the share your trip. There's GPS tracking. There is something called a ride check that we talked about quite a bit in the trial because it came into play in that case, where if you deviate from the course you're supposed to go or have a long stop, you'll get an alert on the phone that says, hey, what's going on? Like, we see that you've stopped, or we see you're off track. Do you need assistance? That is often followed by a call if there is no answer. In addition to that, there's the ability for riders to call 911. Uber now allows you to text. And if you text to 911, it shares your location, it shares the license plate of the car, and allows law enforcement to take action. There's a ADT function. You can call if you think, hey, this may not be a police deal, but I'm uncomfortable. We encourage you to press on the ADT security button, and there's always a person there who can talk to you, and just be on the phone. Then there's everything from PIN verification. Obviously, the address anonymization is a feature that's been offered. There's an on-trip toolkit where you can go and have all of this at your fingertips. The list goes on and on.
One thing that Rachel talked about was the sort of question around the effectiveness of the ride check feature that you mentioned. She said in the case of the plaintiff in Arizona, she didn't see the ride check message because she was being raped when she received it. Does Uber follow up if riders don't respond to those ride check messages?
In the particular case you're talking about, that's exactly what happened. There was a ride check that came in, there was not a response, and then there was a call, and that is the protocol. What the jury learned when they heard evidence that 99% of the time, the ride checks are false positives, and it's not feasible for the police, for example, to be notified. So in the trial, when this came up, there were experts who testified about deterrence. And one of the things that we have found is, although ride check, for example, may not be the end-all be-all to save someone from a bad thing happening in that situation, knowing that ride check, as well as the suite of other safety features is on, really does deter bad behavior.
On the point of deterrence, why not require camera recording so that everybody knows what's happening all of the time? I would imagine that would deter some of these situations.
There were 2 allegations of design defect that went to the jury. One of them was, hey, you should have had a dash cam. And the second one was, hey, you should have had this women preference ability for the plaintiff to choose a female driver. And both of those alleged design defects were rejected by the jury after we were able to show the evidence. That over the last many years, Uber has committed literally millions of dollars to researching and developing dash cams. And what has happened is there is a variety of different roadblocks and hurdles. One of them, of course, is technological. That makes sense. The storage capabilities of an individual's phone or an individual camera, the ability to monitor those and install those has been problematic. And also privacy concerns coming from both the driver and the rider. So what was the fix? Well, obviously the audio recording is available on either side. And now there is a camera video recording option in the driver's phone. So if you get into an Uber, your driver may be doing a video monitoring, and we encourage that. I think the thing that I hope everyone understands, and I know the jury really took away, is that when we look at a tech company like Uber, we understand that it's a tech company. It relies on the support of a lot of third-party interest groups that have come to Uber and said, we know you're not experts in sexual assault. We know you don't do this every day. Let us help you. And Uber has taken that help. We're not going to be able to eliminate sexual assault in our society. I wish we could. I wish we could absolutely eliminate it on the platform. But Uber is doing what it can. And I was very happy to see that after hearing 3 weeks of evidence, that's what the jury decided as well. Uber maintains its commitment to safety and is always looking at ways to make the platform safer.
Thanks so much to Kim Bueno and Rachel Abrams. After my conversations with them, Uber was found liable in a second federal bellwether trial in North Carolina. A jury ordered the company to pay $5,000 to a woman who said her driver grabbed her inner thigh and made an inappropriate comment during a late-night ride in 2019. In a comment, an Uber spokesperson noted the relatively small size of the award and said the company has, quote, strong grounds for appeal. The next time you take a rideshare, make sure you're using those available safety features, like audio recording and sharing your trip with a friend. Women can also set their driver preference to women only. If you're going to be out late with friends, consider making a plan to travel all together back to someone's place. It's the old school rule, you're safer in numbers. And if you were harassed or assaulted while on a ride, the apps offer a place to report safety incidents in your ride history. Rachel also encourages survivors to go to the police. Your report might help protect other riders. That's it for this week's episode of Terms of Service. I'm Claire Duffy. Talk to you next week.